Hi, I'm Anatole, and today I am going to review the graphic novel Cover by Brian Michael Bendis and David Mack. If you are interested in spy stories, if you're interested in kooky postmodern takes on spy stories, if you're interested in workplace drama slash comedies, if you're interested in comic books, then this series is probably for you. So please join me after the introduction, and I will give you my thoughts on this title. Welcome back. This title, Cover, was one of the first series to be released by DC Comics after Brian Michael Bendis left Marvel and came to DC with a lot of publicity, as I might add. And so I think there was a lot of interest initially because of the fact this was one of his independent titles released under DC. So Brian Michael Bendis was given a special contract of doing work for hire for DC on their superhero comics, most notably 2 Superman titles. And then he was also given his own imprint, a pop-up imprint, to handle his creator-owned work. And so this title, Cover, was released under that imprint with the artist David Mack. And Brian Michael Bendis and David Mack have a long history together. One of the more notable things that they had produced was a run on Daredevil in the early aughts. And because this was a quote-unquote spy title, I think people who knew of Bendis' work on Daredevil and on Jessica Jones were probably intrigued. And then when the synopsis of the series was released, that this would be about a comic book artist come spy, I think that probably piqued the interest of people who may not even have been interested before. Before I continue, let me read the brief summary of the title from Comic Book Roundup. And the information, it was released, first issue September 2018, and it was only a 6-issue run, so issue 6 was March 2019, and then the graphic novel came out a couple months after that, I think. Years in the making, from award-winning team of Brian Michael Bendis and multimedia sensation David Mack, comes a brand new graphic novel experience. And it's kind of based on a true story, sort of. Deep in the American intelligence community, someone realizes that comic book creators who travel all over the world to sell their wares might make the perfect cover, and there's the title, Cover, for operatives in the dangerous topsy-turvy world of intelligence and counterintelligence. And that's when all hell breaks loose. This is the story of the time the world of comics and the world of international spy work smashed together with unexpected results. And so there it is in Princess, the series, the 6 issues. And I want to handle this a little bit by talking about the general plot and genre of the series, which I've mentioned. I want to talk about the comic book creator, which I've done a little bit, and then I guess characters and my thoughts on it. Now, before I go into my thoughts on the series, I do want to mention the reviews of the individual issues of the series, because it was released not as just as a standalone graphic novel. It was released as a 6-issue miniseries, and a graphic novel came after that. So issue 1 received a score of 8.5 on Comic Book Roundup. Issue 2, 8.7. Issue 3, 7.4. Issue 4, 7.3. Issue 5, 7.3. And issue 6, 9.1. And this corresponds with my own feelings, and that is that the series has a very good beginning, a very soft middle, and then I actually think the ending is not as strong as a 9.1. And when I talk about the plot, which I guess will be right now, I want to talk about the reasons for that. So why does it have this soft middle? The reason is that it's a mashup of 2 different genres, and only one of those genres has any sort of long-standing history, and that's the spy genre. The second genre I hesitate to call it workplace dramedy because that's the closest that it can come to. You can't really say that it's a comic book farce because those don't exist. But it is a story about the comic book artist and his circle of friends and their very geeky talk about comic books and the way that that world gets smashed into the world of spycraft. And the reason why it feels like two genres smashing together is because neither of them is portrayed super realistically. There are liberties taken. So they do feel like you're taking these two-dimensional characters and putting them together into a new framework. None of the characters really become three-dimensional. The main character, of which the series is about, Max Fields, does come closest to being three-dimensional, but he never really gets there. And I feel that's one of the reasons why the series has that soft middle. When we get to the part where there should be character development and character complication, the character doesn't stand up. He's still so flat, because the character never gets developed. When the spy part of the story gets put on hold for the character part is weak, and so the middle of the series is very weak. I think that's one reason for those weak reviews. So Max has a comic book friend, and where the middle part of the story should be developing this relationship with the friend and introducing conflict and stakes regarding the friend, and the friend works in the studio. Max has his own comic book imprint, comic book studio. There should have been tension between him and the friend that would have developed the friend and developed Max Field's character. But instead, where pages should have been used showing this conflict on Max and the way he wants to branch out. So Max is known for a comic book series, Ninja something Odyssey. I'll look that up later. Ninja Sword Odyssey. It's kind of a riff on Lone Wolf and Cub. And he wants to branch out into science fiction. That should have been the crux of the conflict between him and his friend. This wanting to do something non-commercial. There should have been stakes. This studio, he should have been gambling the livelihood of all the people he employs in his studio by trying to do this science fiction series. And instead of us seeing that Max is betting the farm on this, like going crazy on production value. And there's an easy model for this. If you look at Frank Miller, when Frank Miller went to DC, before he did Dark Knight Returns, he did a science fiction series, the Ronin, where he really pushed the medium by using higher cost paper, very glossy paper, which allowed him to then push into the coloring of the series. And all this was very expensive. And even though he was working in a genre, science fiction ninja genre, it was very European instead of American. And so it was not that commercial on the face of it, and it cost a lot of money. Something like DC can absorb the cost of an artist being very experimental. A small studio cannot, and that's where the conflict and the stakes should have been introduced. Instead, we're given pages of dinners where Max and the friends are telling these stories about being on the fringe of celebrity. They're telling stories about what seems to be popular and why they're not doing those sort of things. And a lot of that gives the artist David Mack leeway to start drawing in different styles, which is great. The only problem is this leeway for the artist is not followed up with character development. And so I think that's why this is not me alone. That's why those issues 3, 4, 5 have such low scores, is because that middle where we should have been given character development and stakes outside of the spycraft is not utilized to its fullest potential. It's quite flabby and weak. Now, where does the series have its strength? And the strength is in introducing something new to a spy story, and that's the comic book element. It's very unique, and when we get these experiments of form in the comic book world, and they're pushed up alongside this spy story, it makes something new. And what I really thought was quite intriguing about this world of comic books and spycraft was the way that there is a pseudo level of reality. So as it mentioned, the story is based on someone in the comic book world who has had some sort of contact with the spy world. My suspicion is that it's the writer Tom King, because Tom King used to work with the CIA, and there's footage of him on a talk show. I can't remember which one. There's Seth Meyers. He's appeared on Seth Meyers. I think it's on Seth Meyers. He talked about how when he was a CIA agent traveling around the world, he would bring comic books with him and try to give the appearance of being a comic book nerd, because who would suspect a comic book nerd was a spy? I think that's where Brian Michael Bendis got the seed for the idea for this series, but I'm only guessing. It's an educated guess. Probably very good, because I don't know who else in the comic book world would match this idea of being that super spy. So there is the level of pseudo reality, and Bendis is good at giving us the spy talk that seems real. The character, the liaison with the CIA that Max Field develops, Julia, talks about how the nerds at Langley have calculated that Max Field's spy mission has a success rate of 78%. Whether they do have these calculations, I would imagine they do. The algorithm for how they determine that, I can't guess that Brian Michael Bendis knows what that is. He's probably just making numbers up. But he quotes Julius saying that the nerds at Langley jizz themselves at this number of success rate of 78%. So he can make it sound real, even while the characters are two-dimensional and they're doing the typical things you see in a spy genre, which we see in issue 6. Brian Michael Bendis really leans into the spycraft by having a chase scene through a European city. But he also plays these downbeat moments when Max Field sort of rails against Julia and all the secrecy that she keeps, and kind of feels unsettled that she never really fills him in on what he's doing, why he's doing it, and she disappears after the mission's done and he doesn't see her for a year or so, and he feels like he is being played as a pawn, which probably he is. So there are those moments that kind of create this sense of an extra layer to the genre, but it never reaches the level of reality. And I don't think Brian Michael Bendis has any interest in it. So now let me talk about the art. Again, I've alluded to David Mack being able to draw on these different styles. So we get the style of the ninja comic, and I assume that's what meant to be a Lone Wolf and Cub parody. And then we get, I think it's a Rob Liefeld image look. And then there are many references to Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby, more than one way, is the heart of this series. Just referencing Jack Kirby, a conversation about Jack Kirby becomes the crux of the plot. It's what, and I'm not trying not to spoil anything, but there's a moment where characters decide which way they're going to turn, and it's a conversation about Jack Kirby that makes that decision happen. It's very interesting. I don't think you can find any analog in spycraft to characters making very important decisions based on discussions about genre, in this case, comic books. And I've always loved David Mack, so I'm in. I can't find any fault with David Mack. The faults I have are in the plotting of Brian Michael Bendis, and in the characters never being given that extra level. Now, it is a comic book, and in 6 issues, that's a lot to ask to build really real characters, but I think he missed that opportunity. Those scenes where the characters, in the middle part of this series, where we turn from the world of spycraft into the world of the comic book nerd, the scenes where the characters that are the friends of the main character, Max Field, they're in his orbit, those scenes of them talking about comic books They should have introduced conflict. That conflict, and the way you saw the characters respond to the conflict, would have created that extra dimension. And I can mention one more missed opportunity. There is the character of the father of Max Field, who comes by only when he needs money, and so that idea of Max looking for a father figure and trying to find it through his work, trying to find the validation he doesn't get from his father, that could have been explored, and that conflict could have been developed more, especially when we have this idea that there is another person, another spy. I'm not going to say who, again, trying to leave this as spoiler free as possible, but there's another comic book creator who is on the other side, and we could have seen maybe that character could have been that father figure, or represented that father figure. I think maybe Jack Kirby in some ways is meant to be that father figure, but the idea that Max is looking for the father figure because his real fathers failed him, that could have been explored, and maybe it will be. Maybe that's an idea that's being held for. But reportedly, there will be a second series, or a second collection, second graphic novel. So maybe I'm picking up on threads that Brian Michael Bendis intends for that second volume. But I can only respond to what I have. I can only respond to these 6 issues, and so I think I've done it. I think I've given you in about 15 minutes, or more or less, my rough feelings about this collection. I would place it somewhere in the low 8s. I agree that it scores as high as it does because it does something so unique. It has great art, and when it works, when the writing works, it works really well. And I think that's why you saw those high scores in issue 1, 2, and 6. And then the low scores in 3, 4, 5, because the failings of it are really brought out in that middle section where we usually the story is meant to develop characters and raise the stakes of the conflict, and all that kind of fails. So I think that's probably a product of Brian Michael Bendis' writing habit. His habit is to write very fast and to write 1 issue a week, if not 1.5, because he is very prolific. And so you see, he can come up with really good ideas, but one criticism he has is that over a long haul, he doesn't give those ideas enough thought, enough development, and so he fails at some point and just starts doing hack work. And here, because it's only 6 issues, you see where that middle section, the lack of development of the idea shows up, because the characters don't have that third dimension. We don't see enough of integration between character and conflict. Instead, it's just a lot of loose scenes that are tied to the theme of the comic book world, but don't do 2 things at once: develop theme and develop conflict. And I think I've done it. I think I've kind of hit all the main notes I've wanted to hit. So if you've read the series and you have your own thoughts, please let me know in the comments below. And if I inspire you to check this out, then I've done my job. Whether you like the series or not, I think is not my intention. My intention is just to point out something I think is different and unique and worth checking out. And if what I've described about this series seems like it's up your alley, then you should check it out. All right, so that's all for now. I hope you'll join me again and on my next video. And until then, take care and be well. Goodbye.